Good morning, and thank you for joining us. Those of you that were able to get here this morning. I am Dr. Vivian Pratt, and I am a previous school principal, also a bilingual ESL director. And our session today really is going to be about understanding CLC, the practice, how to do it, cross-linguistic connections, but we're also going to present some of the success Palm Beach has had using the program in a variety of ways. And with me, sorry, my colleague, Dr. Sandra Mercuri, and she'll tell you a little bit about herself.
I'm a retired university professor and now a full-time consultant, and I'm the co-author of Cross-Linguistic Connections with Dr. Pratt, and today we are very honored to be presenting with our colleagues with West Palm Beach that they have been working using our resources with great results.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us today. My name is Lisa Capper. I'm manager of dual language programs in Palm Beach County, and we are very excited to be able to come and share with you today our implementation of CLC and our successes.
Good morning. My name is Natalie Campillo, and I'm a dual language instructional specialist. And we're here to share how we actually implemented this program across from the beginning to end, and how we continue to evolve in our implementation.
And so without further ado, I'm going to start with a little bit of what is BPT. And BPT is biliteracy para todos, right? Biliteracy for all. And it is this resource, but we're not just going to focus on the resource, we're also going to focus on the pedagogy of it. Came about really to help understand teachers the process on how to deliver a cross-linguistic connection. Because one of the things that we notice is I understand the importance of doing the bridge. However, what words do I choose? What sentences, where do I draw from? So in an intent to help the teachers, that's how it was developed. And our belief is, again, our program emerged from our experience in working with the teachers and knowing that there was a need for understanding how to do the pedagogy and what foundational skills, what phonology, grammar, syntax, etc., they would have to use. But we believe that we embrace students' language practices as well as we want to connect the two languages of instruction, but we also wanted to empower teachers with a resource on how to do it, how to support them. And so what is biliteracy? Biliteracy, we always use this conceptualization of a trenza, right? Like a braid. So if you just look at these trenzas right here, there's about 4 of you here with us today. If you just look at these trenzas right here, what do these trenzas mean to you? Well, how are these trenzas like biliteracy? What do we do in biliteracy? What's the big intent when we teach for biliteracy? Say that? Teaching another language. They already have a language. We're teaching another language. And we are trying to connect those languages, right? We're always weaving. And when we think about CLC, cross-linguistic connection, some of you may know it as the bridge. When we think about that, we really are intentionally of making those connections across those two languages. So biliteracy is an ongoing, is flexible and dynamic process that bilinguals use to communicate. But in instruction, we also use it as pedagogies, as methods that are congruent with the bilingual students. So why BPT? Why this particular resource BPT? Well, we know that from a monolingual perspective, there is these spaces that are English or Spanish. Remember that? Did you ever hear that you cannot speak Spanish when you're in English or English when you're in Spanish? There was this belief, please, there was this belief of strict separation of languages. And so we've shifted from that belief of true separation of languages to really understanding what is a bilingual student. We know that a bilingual student is not a monolingual. They're not two different people, two different language systems. They have one language system that is integrated with features of both languages. This idea that when we're in Spanish, we need to just stay only in Spanish assumes that the student only makes meaning in Spanish. And a bilingual student makes meaning using both their languages as we do as humans. But if we think of this bilingual biliteracy perspective that's more congruent to how bilingual students make meaning, then we understand that yes, we need to have those spaces in our time and language allocation where there is time for Spanish and there is time for English. But we also understand that there are pedagogies, there are methods that are congruent with translanguaging in which we can bring in the other language. When we're in an English space, we can do a preview. How many of you are familiar with previews and reviews? We can take a few minutes in the opposite language to review the concept and the vocabulary, but still stay the majority of the time in the other language. And then we also, when we're in the English space, we can connect from English to Spanish. So that's a space that is very strategic, is very planned, is very intentional, in which we're bringing the other language to that English space, and then vice versa. When we're in the Spanish space, we can bring in the English through the previews and reviews, and then we can bring in the English to connect through the cross-linguistic connections. But we also know that when students are in discussion, congruent with their linguistic repertoire, they are going to discuss using English and Spanish, Mandarin and English, whatever the linguistic repertoire is composed of. And we don't want to not allow the students to do that, because that is meaning making, right? They're trying to make sense of their learning using all the linguistic resources that they have. However, when it's time for students to then respond, we do want the students to, one of the things that the teacher can do is support the student to respond in that target language, right? Through sentence stems, through repetition, through lots of the support that we know how to do. If we think about this bilingual linguistic repertoire, we know that the student can, to make use of his whole language system, he can think the word hola, but he can say hello, right? Or we can hear something in Spanish and understanding of the other language, because that's just how the bilingual brain works. And that's something we have to understand. Bilingual students, they have a bilingual brain that processes information many ways in the same way as a monolingual brain, but there are some other things that exist that make it very unique and different. But we do it because we want to support meaning making and we want to teach for biliteracy. So why BPT? Why Biliteracy para Todos, which is our particular resource, is because we needed a resource to help the teachers connect those languages, right? Connect phonology, connect sounds across the two languages, have the kids study the sound of the letter H in English and Spanish. How many of you have students who maybe in third grade still write the word house with a J? Have you seen that? Is that an error? No, it's a linguistic approximation. The student uses what he knows in Spanish, and the sound closest to the H sound, he's hearing a J, so he writes a J. But it's not an error. He needs a moment to talk about language to connect those two, to understand when do I write the letter H and when do I use the J. We also wanted to, most importantly, this is a key feature in our resource and our pedagogy that we're going to show you today, is getting the kids in discussions. Because discussion leads to oracy, and we know that oracy is the foundation to comprehension. So if the students are not discussing, they're not making sense of what they're learning. And so we, through CLC, it's not just about putting words side by side, but the kids are thinking and they're talking and they're making meaning about how these features of language are similar or different. And so we did want to, once again, shift that delivery of instruction from a monolingual type of instruction to a more bilingual and a holistic approach congruent to how the students make sense, but again, to support our goals of bilingualism in our dual language programs, right? Bilingualism, biliteracy, high academic achievement in both program language, as well as that social cultural competence. So when we think about the why of cross-linguistic connections, we know that teaching for biliteracy is different than just teaching for literacy, right? So those of you who are here, do you want to share a little bit why that's true? How teaching for biliteracy in two languages is different than just teaching for literacy in what language? What are some of the things that you guys do or that you have noticed? How do you construct your curriculum, do your lesson plans, so that the teachers are really teaching for biliteracy? Anyone wants to share?
Please.
Go ahead, and then you can wait some.
Every time that I interact with teachers that are facilitating professional learning, I make sure to start off discussing how each of the languages are required, because the processes are very different.
Right.
And that sets the base and the tone of the rest of the instruction. So they are more aware of how am I going to adjust to the reality of my classroom, knowing that the students are thinking in either or both languages, but they are acquiring the literacy skills for each one of them.
Yeah, so we have to know what's the same and what's different, right? Kind of like, do we want, in bilingual education, we've always heard that, what they do in English, you do in Spanish? Have you heard that? And how does that work? It doesn't. We have to be really intentional. You don't want to just say, we're going to teach phonemic awareness and we're going to work on onset of rhyme. In English, that works. At, that makes sense. But in Spanish, what are we going to do? Ama? That makes no sense, right? No one understands that you're trying to say mama. We would do it through the syllables, right? So there's some things that we have to say when in English we're doing onset of rhyme. This is what we're going to be doing in Spanish because we are planning and teaching for biliteracy. We're always, again, that break, we're always weaving very intentionally. Itself?
Yeah, I was gonna say, kind of along with what you were saying, teaching literacy in a monolingual way, Spanish becomes a translation of English.
Mm-hmm.
Our anchor charts become a translation, and so really it does not address the student's repertoire.
Yeah, and when we do that, we would only get to half the curriculum if we did that, right? So it does require that we're super intentional on how to do that. Thank you for sharing. So teachers who lack understanding of the deep purpose for cross-linguistic connections. When we walk into classrooms, when we visit, when we do coaching, we notice that sometimes it gets done at the surface level. Like we know that one of the things that teachers first connect to, and it makes a lot of sense to them, and it's a great place to start, is cognates, right? At the morphology level. So we go and we see evidence of that. But then at the very first surface level, when we start with cognates, it's basically just putting the cognates side by side. And the students are looking at it and they say, oh, they mean the same thing, they look similar. And that's a very surface level. Because if we went to a little bit deeper in understanding, we would talk about the suffixes of those cognates, right? And we would understand that there's a session that we do that is called Morphology Beyond Cognates, because we also want to study and look at verb endings, for example. It's still part of morphology, not just cognates. So that's why we want to help deepen that understanding. And one of the key ideas behind the bridge is to accelerate language. We take what they know in one language, right? And then we connect it to the other language. So like Excel said, we're not teaching twice. If we taught adjective nouns in language arts, we don't have to repeat adjective nouns in English. If we taught it in Spanish, right? Because the function of adjective nouns is the same. What do we do instead? We have a moment in which at some point during that week, we're going to have a cross-linguistic connection where the students are going to have to just notice. What do they have to notice about adjective noun? What is the difference? The position of the words, right? So from a monolingual perspective, many, many years ago, before many of us entered this dual language journey, there was the whole teaching twice. We taught adjective noun here, adjective noun here. Now is we connect because we know they have the knowledge in one of the languages. So at this point, talk to someone at your table. What have you heard that resonates with you? And what might be something that you want to know more about CLC? How do you do your cross-linguistic connection? Just talk at your table.
Okay, we're gonna come back together.
We have, someone's gonna share from the
Okay. So we're gonna have some people sharing. So what about that table over there? Who's gonna share? Okay.
So we were talking about the challenge of embedding cross-linguistic connections throughout the day because many of us teach it and connect with it during the literacy block through readings and things like that. But we gave the example of if our focus happens to be the ing ending, it's really hard to continue that throughout the day. And so one thing that our district has done is within our dual units, we take that core CLC, for example, ing endings, and we give at least one example per content area. So for example, in social studies, they were colonizing, and we give it in English and Spanish so that they can see how the ing looks in both languages. They were adding sumango or whatever the example and the standard might be, but then that gives both our English teacher and our Spanish teacher the comparison, and again, at least one springboard example that they can tie in across their day.
Okay. Someone here? Ever share?
Well, one of the things that we use, I use a lot is the meta-cognitive charts, and I call them trouble ones because if I'm teaching Spanish, I do it in Spanish wherever I'm teaching at that moment in any content area. In that travel poster or chart, go to my English teacher, and then she does a continuation, not a translation, but she always use the time for I always call the bridge opportunity at any moment to teach wherever you need to in that content area. But it's the travel chart to go to the other teacher.
And I think from these examples, what we see is that there is not one way to do it. I think what we need to help teachers understand that there is a need for this to happen in any way that they can make it fit in their schedule. Is that conversation of engaging the kids in what ways these languages are the same or different, what is so valuable, so the kids can internalize it. So thank you for sharing. We're gonna now dive into what is a cross-linguistic connection. And I wanna say that for us, we call it cross-linguistic connections, but for others, maybe the bridge, bridge level 1, bridge level 2, meta-language. If you come from a linguistic background, it may be your contrastive analysis. These are all different labels for the same kind of processes in which we want to engage the kids as they discover and explore in what ways these languages are the same or different. So the cross-linguistic connection is really a pedagogy that engages the students in talking about language. And I think something that has been very consistent in our bilingual programs is that we have been teaching in the language, but we have not been teaching about the language. And I'm a sociolinguist by training, so I always think about Dr. Michael Halliday's when he said that kids learn language by using language and by talking about language. And I think cross-linguistic connection does exactly that. And it happens when you bring the two languages side by side. Because in programs where we teach in Spanish space and in the English space, like Vivian was saying, it could become a parallel monolingual program. Spanish here and English here with no connection. So what these pedagogies are trying to do is to really bring that brain to teach for biliteracy. So the goal is to guide. What is the role of the teacher? As teachers, we tend to be the givers of information. And you can do that in your language arts block. But when it comes to the cross-linguistic connection, the role of the teacher is to support the students in noticing. You moderate the conversation. You prompt them. What do you notice about this? Talk to your bilingual partner. Talk to your tables. It's for them to explore and come to that aha moment. Because it's not that the teachers didn't teach it. It's that until they see it side by side, what they realize it's the same or it's different. And that's when they start more clearly separating the two languages, and that has an impact in decoding skills, spelling, comprehension, better reading. And what is that they have to notice? They have to notice in grammar, syntax, phonology, morphology. When we bring those aspects of languages to teachers, the first thing they said is, oh, I didn't take a linguistic class, or I took a linguistic class so far ago, long ago that I don't remember. You don't have to be a linguist. These are your standards. This is what you teach day in and day out. We come from Texas, so for us it's in strand 2 and strand 6. In Common Core is mainly in the language space that you will find most of the things that, or in the foundational reading skills. So this is what you teach. And we have to make sure that as we do this, we allow the kids to connect. The goal of this pedagogy is to allow the kids to connect from English to Spanish or from Spanish to English. Because when we look at biliteracy is bi-directional. As bilingual teachers, we always thought that it was from Spanish to English, but we know that that's not the case. Why? In many cases, it's because we're not teaching kids who only speak Spanish. We are teaching simultaneous bilingual kiddos now. Kids who are exposed to both languages since birth. So we have to capitalize in the skills that the kids come to school with. And when we do that, we develop meta-linguistic awareness. It's becoming aware of how these languages are in comparison. And of course, ultimately, we develop biliteracy. So the big question is always how. Tell me how. I know the why, I know what it is, but I don't know the how. So when we look at the how, the process is that the skills that we teach, because yes, like Dr. Pratt said, we start with content or we start with vocabulary side by side, and that's important, but what else? So those are the skill level that we really want teachers to explore. Those skills need to have been taught. We need to avoid the unknown here because the kids need to have already known that skill in one of the languages. So if we study in Spanish, then when the kids know a little bit more and have practiced that in Spanish, that they are ready for connecting to English. Or if the skill was taught in English, similarly, after practice, then they can connect to Spanish. But we are never going to teach the skill for the first time through the cross-linguistic connection. The other layer that we want teachers to consider is that if you're going to use a book or if you're going to use students' writing samples to pull from there to do these cross-linguistic connections, always use vocabulary that kids already know. Always use a book that the kids already have been read or themselves or have been read to by the teacher. Why? Because if you use a new book, comprehension is the first thing that is going to be the barrier for discussing language. So sometimes we have to help teachers understand that you're not teaching reading, you are not teaching the skill per se, you are addressing languages, language comparison here. So use a book that you use in a prior lesson and use a skill that you already taught. Those are very important aspects of the how. Then once that students know, we will develop these cross-linguistic lessons. And you will see in the example that I'm going to share from our resource that the lesson is already laid out for the teachers. But it doesn't have to be a script. It's a guidance for teachers to understand the steps in order to engage the kids in all 4 language domains. Through these lessons, the kids are going to be engaged in reading, they're going to be talking a lot, and they're going to be also writing about it. And after this lesson happens, the teachers, all the partner teachers, need to be talking to each other. And if I taught that skill from Spanish to English, the English teacher needs to be monitoring that the kids are actually applying that into the other language, or vice versa.
Can you give us a concrete example of starting some initial instruction?
I'm going to give you a full example. So this is one of the examples from the resource. And I'm going to walk you through, I'm not going to teach you the lesson, I'm going to walk you through the lesson. So you will find the standards. One thing that we did very intentionally with this product was to provide the teachers with all the information needed to develop these lessons. And one thing that we always hear when we go to work with teachers is if you're teaching Spanish, teachers are reticent to say, oh, I don't know enough of the English phonology to actually connect. Or if you're the English teacher, I'm not so sure about how that happens in Spanish. So one thing that we have at the forefront, in the front matter of the resource is each lesson has the standard and has the rule for that standard in English and in Spanish. So if I'm going to do it from English to Spanish, I have the Spanish there as a reference, so I can guide my students in English to understand how this works across these two languages. And the same if you're doing it in Spanish. So the standards are anchoring the lesson, and those are the two books, one in Spanish and one in English, and no, it's not a translation that you're doing. You want the kids to be looking at the two texts side by side to see how the languages are used. And the teacher will always introduce the lesson by saying, what is the focus of today's conversation? Today, we will look at, we're going to learn about the sound that the letter H makes in English and in Spanish. We're going to discover that. You probably learned it only in Spanish, and now we're going to see how it happens in the other language. So the students are going to be with their bilingual partners, looking at the text first in one language, and the teacher will say, look at these pages and find words that begin with the letter H. And as the kids are finding those words in the text, the teacher is beginning to build these words in an anchor chart. So it's a co-constructed activity. And while teachers love to do these things digitally, we highly encourage that when you start building the anchor chart, that should be on paper, because that goes on the walls and it becomes the point of reference of language development for the students. So the teacher will discuss with them what sound the letter H makes in these words. And in these words, the sound is, and some kids who may be Spanish speakers will say, oh, maestra, suena como la J. It sounds like the letter J. Yes, so the teacher engaged in that conversation about language, waiting for the students' analysis of what they are hearing. And of course, then the kids find other words, now with the letter H in middle position. And the conversation is, does the letter H in middle position sounds the same or different? And those are TPR signs that teachers can use to engage the kids in those conversations. But there is no one book that is going to give you everything that you want for your lesson. So we also added some words that are not in the text. And we give it to the students and said, but you said that in beginning position, it sounds good. And in middle position, it's silent. But what about these words? Honest and out. What do you hear? So the goal is for them to really understand that the letter H in English also could be silent in the position, because that's what we always say since kindergarten in Spanish, that the letter H is silent. So the teacher closes with just a summary of all what we have discussed to summarize our discussion. And then she moves to the Spanish, same process. It's very consistent the way we do it. The kids will look at those words, and as they find the words, the teacher is adding those words in the anchor chart. And again, there is no word with letter H in middle position, so the teacher adds those two words and asks the kids, so what happened with the H in middle position in Spanish? Does it still have a silent, and have the kids discuss. So once we have it in English and we have it in Spanish, then, so you see here that there is a lot of talking by the students and the teacher, and they are reading, they are going back to the text, and now we're going to have partner talk, for which we provide those sentence structures, because we want the students to develop the academic language to the discourse level. The teachers may decide to have the kids discuss in any way, but I think some teachers want also the kids to understand more complex grammatical constructions. And the only way that they will move to the higher level of sophistication of language will be if we provide that more complex language for them, because it's a level of language that they don't have. So after they have that conversation, then we call it student investigation. And what is it? Is one more opportunity to find more examples, because we want the kids to see that there is a pattern in what all these different aspects of language are given as. So we want them to see that it's not just one or two examples. No, there is more to that. So now the teacher is not guiding as much. Now she's monitoring what the partners are doing on their own. It's more an application process. Same thing, look at page 13, find more words that and the teacher will add those words to the anchor chart if they are different from the ones that we already added to the first pages of the anchor chart. And they go back to another page in Spanish, and they continue to do the same with this vocabulary. So we wanted to see the layers of the lesson. The teacher introduces, the teacher does it with the students, they engage in the first conversation, then they move to the Spanish, they do the same, and they talk. They kind of summarize this first piece. And then we go into more practical application. But it's very short, and it's very intentional. And then she also gives that question about the word vehículo, because they wanted to talk about the age again in middle position. And another partner talk. Here we have more, give me examples. I want to make sure that you understand these different aspects of the sound of the letter H in English and Spanish. Now, as a teacher, you may be thinking, oh my God, this is so long. I don't have time for this. Two things happen. One, we are expecting that this has been developed with the idea that you will do this once a week. So you don't have to spend 30 minutes every day on this. But also, you can split the lesson into 2 days. You can do the introduction on the first part on day 1, 10, 15 minutes, and then you can do the student investigation and the writing on the second day, another 10, 15 minutes. So it's still talking about language, but you can look at your schedule and see where does it fit better and in what ways. So during this, at the end of the student investigation, the goal is that let's summarize what we have learned. And the words are already there, because remember, the teacher was collecting those words. So now she's going to ask, so how do we use it in English? And as the students share, the teacher will write it on the anchor chart. And then how do we use it in Spanish? And then the teacher will write it in the anchor chart. So this is why it's so important that you do it on paper, because this is what goes on the walls, and the kids are going to have not only the examples, but it's going to have the rules of how to use it. And that is what really is empowering for the students. So when they write or work independently, they have the linguistic support that will allow them to read or write to a high level. I don't know why this goes twice. And then we come to what we call the review. That is the end of the lesson and is where the writing comes into place. So if you are working with 5th grade students, 4th, 5th grade, this could be an independent work in their journals. If you're working with kindergartens, it's definitely going to be a shared writing activity. If you're working with 2nd, 3rd graders, it could be shared or it could be an interactive writing that you do with the students. But really is, what have we learned about this sound across these 2 languages? And that is what closes the lesson. So, as you saw through the whole lesson, that we were very intentional on having the kids target the 4 language domains and with the linguistic support needed for that. So, do you have any questions about the layering of the lesson? Any comments that you want to make? Yes, ma'am.
So the only thing that comes to mind when I think about applying this, and I love this, but lots of times our material materials are not the same. We're learning about ecosystems, she is my partner teaching the Spanish side, you don't always have the same.
But you're not teaching content, you're teaching language. So you can.
Right, do you need the same book in Spanish?
No, not necessarily. This product has the book in Spanish and English, but you can do a cross-linguistic connection using the English book and translating those words in Spanish. Yeah, you can complement the other if you don't have both.
Yeah.
But in this product, we are giving both because it's easier for the teacher and is also another layer of literacy development for the students to have both texts side by side. Okay. Any other comments, any other questions that you may have before we give the floor to our friends from West Palm Beach?
Okay, so again, we are very honored to be here and to share how we took CLC and incorporated it into Palm Beach County. Who are we? Well, we are an A-rated district, have to toot our horn. We have 182 district operated schools. Okay, and out of those 182 schools, we have 144 that are Title I schools. So we are actually not living in the rich and famous, just to point that out. We are the 10th largest school district in the nation. And we have about a little over 22,000 employees. And of those, 13,000 of them are teachers. We have 38 dual language schools that service over 10,000 children in K-12. And we have 187,000 students total in our district. And 45,000 of them are active ELLs. Okay, so we have a very large lift. And being that it is a very large lift, we're still able to, with our very, very tiny team, roll out this product, right? So why cross-linguistic connections? So we know what it is, okay? We know what they are and how important they are. But when we are looking at over 500 K2 teachers, okay, PD gets very difficult, right? To get everybody on the same level. We have teachers that come and go, teachers that are career changers, teachers that are substitutes, that are inside classrooms, that have no idea what any of this is, just trying to survive, right? International teachers that are coming over. Thank you for reminding me, international teachers. So we have a range of understanding, right, about how to teach inside dual language programs. So when we gratefully came across biliteracy para todos, right, and we really started paying attention, we thought this is perfect. This resource helps teachers understand this process, right? So of course, being such a large district and being who we are, we have to start small. We always start with baby steps, okay? So I'm going to hand it over to Natalie right now for her to explain our baby steps over the last 3 years, okay, with this product. And then we'll come together and talk about lessons learned.
Hi. So the question that we all have is, how do we embed this into the amount of resources we have? Our district, as you know, is huge. You saw that it's huge. We cannot touch our core. There's so many different political things that we have to go around. So we had this material and we had to figure out how do we implement it in order for it to be successful in our district. So I started off with one school, 33 LY third graders. This was 12 weeks before our state now has 3 progress monitoring assessments by the state. So one in the beginning of the year, one in the middle, and one at the end. So this is how we did progress monitor K-10. FAST. So FAST is 3rd through 10th grade, and then K2 is STAR by Camium. So 12 weeks before the PM3, which is the 3rd progress monitoring, we started with these 31 LY students, so English language learners, Spanish speaking students, to see how can we implement this? Is this going to be successful for us? So we use the baseline data of the first progress monitoring for the state so it can be consistent. So 83 of those students were below grade level in English vocabulary part in that test. So that test identifies by subset. Yeah. So by sub-skills, so vocabulary, phonics, but we just focused on vocabulary here. And then we also have a tool that we monitor for Spanish. So those same students that are Spanish-speaking students were below, 73% were below grade level in Spanish vocabulary as well. So obviously they were a little stronger on the Spanish side. So the goal was to increase the achievement by 10% on the Spanish side and on the English. So this is where we moved on to seeing how this cross-linguistic connection product is going to support our students. So before I show the results, these students were tutoring 1 hour a week for those 12 weeks. They were tutoring 1 hour a week. We had 4 teachers using it. Just after school, again, like the lady said, they've already taught this lesson, whether in English or Spanish, because they were in 3rd grade. We used the product that was developing, which can go between 1st and 3rd grade. So these students have already some way of learning in Spanish and English, but they had that gap. So how are we going to close it? So with that tutoring, these were the results. So the students increased 33% in their PM, in the English, and this is the Spanish. As you can see, the Spanish we monitor every month. So they increased 18% in the Spanish vocabulary over time. So we really wanted to make sure that we were seeing both sides, because as you know, across the CLC, we were using Spanish, English, Spanish. The teacher was starting the instruction in Spanish and connecting it to English because these students were native Spanish speakers.
So you started this
No, so we started literally January. So we got the data from the beginning of the year, the PM in the beginning, but we started 12 weeks before PM3. So this was just once a week, and the teacher focused 1 hour. So they used one book and specifically went in the skill and went back and forth in Spanish and English. So then, obviously with this cohort of students, we had to get buy-in from the parents. So at the end, I was like, let me get input from the parents to see what is it, do they like it, what are their, so these are comments I translated in English because they were in Spanish. I sent a survey to parents, and pretty much very good. I would like tutoring to continue, helps my kids and on top of it, it stimulates lots of things, which is important because it helps the kids not feel overwhelmed with both classes and make that transfer. Thank you. I'm satisfied. I don't know why. I'm super satisfied. In tutoring, my daughter has paid more attention to her class. So as I talked to these parents, I said, okay, I love that, what do they, because the teachers would give them, continue this work at home with your parents. And the parents was like, they feel they understand now because some of our English languagers in the English class feel overwhelmed. So now they were able to understand that if I'm learning, our curriculum actually bounces off each other at core. So the students were able to now understand, if my Spanish teacher is teaching me how to make those connections in English, now I'm able to move this during the daytime. So that's why parents were saying that they feel like they pay more attention.
Would you mind just saying a little bit more about what the tutoring consisted of?
Yeah. So the tutoring consisted strictly of CLC. Okay. So the teacher literally, as the plan, they would open it from, we didn't have them start, we started at box 1, they opened it and they continued the lesson. So an hour, the lessons usually take about 30 minutes, but we wanted to get, during the day, they're so on time. We told them take one lesson, 1 hour, and dive in deep.
Okay.
Sometimes the kids needed more reinforcement, so they had to obviously dive in deeper.
Yeah.
But that was it. It's open the book and just go.
Right. And so they hadn't done the lesson in the classroom, they were just getting this extra support after school.
Correct.
Okay.
So our core was during the day. This was our supplementary, which again, they've already learned the skill, whether it was in Spanish or English, because this is not by grade level. So these students were 3rd graders, so they should have already seen it at some point, whether they learned it or not. That was why we wanted to see where the gaps were.
Okay.
Let me jump in here 1 minute. it was very controlled. The way we always roll things out is in a very controlled atmosphere, and we do it on a very small scale, so that we can then learn from what we need and enlarge it. And Okapi was wonderful, and Sandra and Vivian were wonderful with coming and training these teachers, training us, so that we knew we had a solid implementation with these 4 teachers that were chosen to do this with the 5th graders.
Thanks.
And because we also did it, our district is very big, and if you roll things out super big and then it just goes into problem. So again, we wanted to figure out how can we use this and be effective. So then this is I also asked the teachers a survey. Did you find the biliteracy tutoring effective? Was the pacing of the lessons good for your students? And did the materials increase your students' cross-linguistic proficiency? Because again, our teachers, we know that they don't have time. We know that, like Lisa was saying, there's no time to PD on cross-linguistic all the time, and how do I do it? And we already have these resources. Our resources don't have it explicitly there like CLC does, but what we saw over time was that our teachers were now comfortable to see, after I'll explain our plan more, but after they were able to see the cross-linguistic, like the CLC book, and move it to their core, they were able to understand, oh, now that makes sense. I don't have to do more work. We're doing it. It's just making sure we connect with our partner teacher. So then fast forward, that same summer, we said, okay, why we don't have summer school for our dual language students. We only have English summer school that everyone has, right? So I said, let's ask dual language schools who wants to do summer school. So out of our 24 schools, then 8 of them said, we want to do summer school for our dual language students. So then we said, okay, you can select first and second grade English language learner students, again, Spanish speaking students based on their academic data. Again, we used our data in Spanish because it's ongoing. And then our goal was Okapi would support student language transfer and emphasize those cross-linguistic connections. So in summer school, it looked a little different. So summer school, it was a whole day. So they have art, they have fine arts, and then we give them 2 hours to do CLC. So in those 2 hours, they actually did 2 lessons, but they also embedded other things. So they made art projects within the books. The kids love the books. And you'll see a video of the kids talking about the books. The books are very engaging, that even teachers are like, oh, I'm always learning when I'm reading these books, because they're very engaging. The students actually like the colors and the pictures. So they did other projects with them, and I'll show you in a second. So these were 8 schools, the number of students that participate in each school, and the percentage, from the pre and the post test, this was a percentage of growth in the phonemic and phonological awareness part. Okay, and if you notice, like, there's not that many students, like some schools had 8, but they had the most results, but this was just the growth from phonemic and phonological awareness. This was vocabulary. And this was 21 days. So summer school was 21 days, and again, they only focused 2 hours of their days on CLC.
I think part of the power, the vocabulary, the gains in vocabulary, is because the lessons are contextualized and they're grounded in text. So you're talking about language, but it's still grounded in text, so they're using the vocabulary now in the context of the reader language.
And nothing is in isolation. So again, like the phonemic, nothing is in isolation. Everything is embedded, and the students are continuously using their 4 language domains, which we push a lot in our district, and I'm sure others do, in order for that growth. And this is on comprehension. The same students, the percentage of growth on comprehension. And then now, fast forward to the following school year, we have Spanish language enrichment camp, which is tutoring for ELs that is paid by Title III. So for dual language schools only, we chose rising 2nd and 3rd grader, maximum of 15 students to 1 teacher based on budget. Even though there's 12 books in each box for each book, because of budget, we had to do 15, which is fine because the students are able to, they have a Spanish and they have an English book, so they're able to share, so it's not a problem. But they did 2 hours weekly. The school then had the opportunity, if they wanted to do 2 hours in once a week, or they wanted to do 2 days, 1 hour each. That was up to them this time. Again, so as we evolved, the goal became more intentional. So as you can see, this goal for that school year was to provide ELL students in dual language programs additional time to practice oral language and literacy skills in Spanish to identify and understand their reading and language skills in Spanish, transferred to reinforce additive bilingualism, biliteracy, and multiculturalism for native Spanish speakers. So with that, this was our growth, again, from pre and post. As you can see, we had over 300 students. The reason why the phonemic and phonological awareness and the word analysis has less students is because that program, some students may test out, so therefore they didn't pre and post on those areas. But as you can see, this was throughout the school year. Some schools it was about 15 weeks. So 15 weeks of 2 hours a week. Then this is the other. We have a school that has mostly native English speakers, right? So and then dual language. So this school we actually trialed with going English, Spanish, English. Okay, so CLC, they have in the beginning half of the book is Spanish, English, Spanish. On the back half of the teacher guide, it goes English, Spanish, English. So with these students, because they were native English speakers, we wanted to say, okay, let's see what results we get with that. So they actually tutored 1 hour a week from English, Spanish, English. They chose grades 1st through 5th grade, and they only tutored, again, once a week from October 11th through March 15th, and then these were their results.
So again, we were testing the theory on both sides. Of course, being that we are the multicultural department, our dual language programs, we wanted a program that would support our ELLs, right? Because we know that as we want our ELLs to be solid in their native language as they're transferring to English, right? But then we were like, well, we have this school that has mostly native English speakers in their dual language program. How would that look the other way? And again, you have growth. Right? You have great growth.
And as you see, the phonemic and phonological awareness, these are conversations that we had with those teachers as to, okay, that probably is those transfers that those students are not understanding, that gap from the language to Spanish. So how can we support them in that? So this brought more conversations to dive in deeper with teacher conversation.
Do you guys have the levels of the students that you tested?
What do you mean, like?
Because all those have levels also, not just the growth.
No, so this was based on our Spanish assessment. So this wasn't on the PM. This was in our progress monitoring levels. So then fast forward to summer 23, we moved on to district-wide. So now we were involved with the conversations of transportation and like now we were full-blown, like we are just as English summer school, we are having dual language summer school. So district-wide, we selected 1st and 2nd grade Spanish-speaking LY students based on their academic data. Again, we gave a pre and post assessment that was given in Spanish, and the goal of the program was to provide the students the opportunity again to enhance their oral language and literacy skills to reinforce their bilingualism and biliteracy. So then here are some of the pictures again. The same thing, they did 2 hours of CLC in the summer, and these are pictures of projects based on the books that the teachers did. They also got creative with having journals for them to actually write. So these are some of the books and some of the artwork that they did. And again, like we said, anchor charts, this was done with the students on the fly. This was taken, they were comparing one of the students' elefantes versus the serpientes. So they are also compare and contrast that because of summer school was longer periods, they were able to go in deeper than what we had from the books. Okay, so now this is a little video of one of our summer schools that they recorded.
Having a person that could teach you 2 languages, that can explain to you, that can have that interaction with you, and that understanding really makes a difference. Sometimes in English, they can't get it. I'm like, okay, so I'm gonna explain it in Spanish to you, and let me see if you could bring it to your real life. And when they make that connection, it makes you feel good.
Our goal as a school district of Palm Beach County is for our students in the dual language program to become bilingual and biliterate. Being biliterate meaning that they can read and write and speak and also listen in both languages. For this, we actually didn't have anything that had these cross-linguistic connections. It's a gap that is missing in a lot of curriculums. This is the bridge that we needed with our core curriculum that helps to make it easier for teachers to develop that biliteracy and biliterate that we want from our students. I put myself in their shoes. On the copy, it makes it easier and it explains it to you right there. It gives you examples both in Spanish and English, so you don't feel lost. This, when I do like this, that means that there's a connection that you're going to make. It could be a connection to your real life, or it could be a connection with the lesson, but the connection is going to happen. So aquí, en este blanco, okay, your second plate, the books are amazing. The kids want to keep going. They don't want to end. So the lessons were very enthusiastic for the students, and it wasn't just another day of tutoring or another summer school day with another program. Our teachers absolutely love it because they don't have to plan. It's done for them. It's there. The books are engaging. The students love it. We've seen positive outcomes in vocabulary especially, and comprehension as well. I love this work. I was an ESOL student when I grew up, so my first language is Spanish. I support and I love advocating for our students and even native English speakers to become bilingual and biliterate because that's what our future is going to call for, and for our students to be global citizens, it's important for them to learn more than one language.
This is the data that we're showing you, but again, this was the school year, again, our language enrichment camp data. So we then moved on to monitoring attendance because we wanted to see how much of those students, 83% were attended. And again, this was their growth over time from the beginning to end. But as you saw, the good thing was that the teacher was able to just open the book and teach. And if the teacher is an English speaking, well, it has to be a bilingual teacher, but if the teacher is mostly English-based and doesn't know kind of the rules of Spanish, in that book she was able to see like, oh, in Spanish it's like this, let me understand it before I teach it to the students, and they don't have to go in and look for resources, it's all there. And then here are pictures again of more things that teachers got creative with the books and how they decided to make their sentence stems and make more words to add to their books. They also even did projects to extend. And then this was our last summer school, same process. Again, 2 hours, same process that we did the prior years, but then we chose first grade through third grade, and then this was their overall percentage of growth.
And again, we're talking 19 to 21 days of summer school, right? So lessons learned. One of the biggest things that we learned is that this is a fantastic resource that supports cross-linguistic connection. And the biggest thing, besides the percentages going up in all domains, the important thing is that teachers were able to practice and understand much better how to make those cross-linguistic connections. Because as it was stated earlier, you know, things were taught in English, skills were taught in English, skills were taught in Spanish, and we're constantly trying to push the conversation of that cross-linguistic connection. And as Sandra said earlier, how do I show me how to do that? And this resource does that for teachers. And one of the biggest things that the teachers kept saying was, we love it. We love it because it's explicit for us to understand how to do that for our students. Because sometimes our core curriculum does literacy very well in English, literacy very well in Spanish. We help to try to bridge that for them. But again, 500 K2 teachers, some that are brand new to teaching, some that are brand new to dual language, and that level of understanding for everybody is vast. Okay, so this resource really helped those teachers that were involved And now you see it, and teachers say to us all the time, can we put this in core? And I'm like, ugh. I'm like, hang in there. We keep putting it into spaces where we're allowed to politically, right? Where we can put it into different spaces. They love it. They absolutely love it. And we also see that now teachers are able to bridge out into those same cross-linguistic connections that they trained and used in summer school and tutoring. And now we see that filtering into their everyday core, right? Even when it's not there in core, they're making those connections. So it's been very powerful for us. And again, it's been really powerful for our children who, like was stated before, are now linguistically thinking, meta-linguistically thinking around language, right? And now with all of this that we've done for the last 3 years in tutoring and summer school and advancing all, teachers, we had tons of teachers. We started with 4 and now summer school, we've got 25, 30 teachers working, and they seem to all talk to each other. And the beauty is they are doing better and it was a side effect, right, of PD through these lovely ladies coming, PDing our summer school teachers, PDing our tutoring teachers, and then them sharing in their PLCs. Well, we could do this because in a resource that I used over the summer, right? So it's been very, very powerful. And now we're able to branch out into that biliteracy space from all of this that we've learned. So now in our classrooms, a big push that for us this year has been, where in your class, English class and Spanish class, where do you have that biliteracy space for children to, on their own, make those connections, that core that you get 2 teachers are planning for explicitly? Where in the rooms is that space? And it's all because of what we learned from CLC, right? So it's been, and that's us. It's been
one more
wonderful.
thing I'm going to add, Lisa, is that some of the students we saw felt very successful because even if they were native Spanish speakers, and the book was they couldn't read in English, they felt successful being able to be like, oh, I can read in Spanish, but then let me look at English and maybe I can read some words. So they were able to actually see themselves going back and forth, and I'd be like, I don't know how to read in class because they had both of their books in front of them. That was a very good thing, motivational for the students and empowering.
Yeah, it's a very specific space that's been very, very rewarding for us. And we wanted to share that with you guys because, again, as you saw, we're a very large district and we're trying to do what's right all the time. And our teachers are trying to do what's right. And when you come across something like this, it's very helpful. So thank you for listening.
Motivation. Thank you.